touching story of love and devotion, as reported by Bryson Rash.
Shortly after 9 o'clock, Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, accompanied only by her brother-in-law, the Attorney General of the United States, Robert Kennedy, came here to the rotunda. The two of them went inside the rope, and they came up the great stairway on the east portico, recognized by police, and the crowd was moved aside, the great crush of people, so that these two people could come into the rotunda. They went inside the velvet roped-off area where is the catafalque and the casket in which the body of the late president rests. Mrs. Kennedy alone went to the side of the casket. She genuflected, touched the casket, and the flag that drapes it turned and departed. Her eyes were moist. The Attorney General met her halfway, took her arm, and led her back out through the crowd, through the portico. She stopped several times to accept the well wishes of several ladies in the crowd as she walked by. Her appearance was an emotional peak which triggered tears among many of those standing by. The two of them then walked out onto the east portico, and a handful of reporters had spotted her and started out immediately after her. The Secret Service man turned to us and said, "Please keep a respectful distance," which we of course did. The two of them walked down the great staircase where just a few hours earlier the body of her husband had been borne and placed in its point of respect. They walked down the staircase, and at the bottom was the big limousine ready to take them back to the White House. Mrs. Kennedy shook her head and said, "No, I would rather walk." The two alone set off across the darkened plaza. They walked across the little grass strip there, and behind them, one Secret Service man, several Capitol policemen. There was no one there, of course, but as they got beyond the Senate wing of the Capitol building itself, they turned left and plunged through a large group of people that were milling about on the sidewalk. They were not recognized. Mrs. Kennedy wore a black dress, a black coat, and a black scarf, which was pulled back from her face. Again, followed by the Secret Service men and 2 or 3 Capitol policemen, they walked down Capitol Hill. This meant they walked over grass, under trees, dodging between parked automobiles, and no sidewalk, of course. Many people were coming up Capitol Hill, and they did not recognize Mrs. Kennedy nor the Attorney General. This included several Capitol Hill policemen. They finally got down to the bottom of Capitol Hill, at first in Constitution Avenue, and there people began to recognize them. They stopped for just a moment, and another well-wisher came up to say hello. And Mrs. Kennedy paid her respects. At the moment, walking into the rotunda, is the President of Ireland, Eamon de Valera. He is accompanied by many of his officials. The President of Ireland has come to the rotunda to pay his respects to the late President of the United States. There was a large group of gentlemen with him. Secretary of State Rusk is among them. The Irish Ambassador, Mr. Kiernan. The President of Ireland, accompanied also by the United States Ambassador to Ireland, Mr. McCloskey. They have paid their respects, and now they walk off to the right. A large group has just come into the rotunda, headed by the President of Ireland, Eamon de Valera. With him is Secretary of State Rusk, and the United States Ambassador to Ireland, Mr. McCloskey. They stand for a moment and talk. And now they walk back across the rotunda and are making their way out. Throughout the evening, there have been a number of these visits. Dignitaries of many nations and of all walks of life have come. to pay their respects to the late president. But now, to return to the story of Mrs. Kennedy's outing. At first in Constitution Avenue, they had been recognized by this time by perhaps 20 people. They fell in behind the police and the few reporters, and the Attorney General and Mrs. Kennedy then turned and walked south on First Street. They met a large group of nuns. Mrs. Kennedy stopped for a moment to accept their condolences, and she thanked them. They walked on farther south on First Street, and at this point, the Attorney General said something to Mrs. Kennedy. She nodded in agreement. The traffic is extremely heavy on the streets in this area, and the Secret Service man called police. Traffic was stopped, and the Attorney General and Mrs. Kennedy then weaved their way through the stopped traffic to the limousine that had followed them down Capitol Hill, and they got into the limousine and went back to the White House. This moment of privacy, alone in a great throng of people, while Mrs. Kennedy had lasted perhaps 16 minutes. The amazing thing about it was that so few people recognized her, and secondly, that she made this walk and visited this area with such a small amount of protection. The respect of the people who did recognize her was enormous. They kept their distance and permitted Mrs. Kennedy, the widow of the president, and the president's brother, the Attorney General, to be alone in the midst of this great crowd. Later in the evening, perhaps an hour after Mrs. Kennedy had visited here, 4 ladies of the Kennedy family also came to the rotunda to pay their respects. Mrs. Rose Kennedy, the mother of the president, Mrs. Eunice, Ethel, and Joan Kennedy. Miss Joan Kennedy is the wife of the senator. Ethel is the wife of the Attorney General. Eunice is the wife of Sergeant Schreiber, the director of the Peace Corps. The 4 of them came. They went inside the small enclosure where the catafalque and the body of the president lies, and kneeled, and for just a moment recited a silent prayer, and then they too left. A moment ago, the president's brother-in-law, Stephen Smith, appeared here to pay his respects. Apparently, throughout the evening, there will be other visitations by members of the Kennedy family and by close friends and by relatives, members of the family. This is Bryson Rash reporting from the Rotunda.